September 15th, 1944, Brest, France. The American messenger carrying General Troy Middleton's surrender demand to the German garrison has walked through the lines under a white flag and has been escorted to the German command post, where General Hermann-Bernhard Ramcke is waiting. Ramcke reads the demand. He puts it down. He picks up his pen and writes his refusal. He has been doing this for 6 weeks, and his hand does not hesitate. The refusal is not a surprise. Nothing about Ramcke's conduct of this siege has been a surprise since the first demand in early August produced the first refusal in the same early August. It is the 6th formal refusal in 39 days of siege, and the American officers who receive it are reading it with the specific and fatigued professionalism of men who have stopped expecting a different answer, but who are required by the military conventions of siege operations to continue asking. It is written in the specific and unambiguous language of a German parachute general who has decided, once, permanently, and without a mechanism for revision, that no formulation of a surrender offer that the American command can construct will produce a different answer. Middleton's demand is reasonable by the military conventions that govern siege operations, by the professional calculus that European military tradition has developed over centuries, for the moment when a garrison commander's professional obligation to resist tips over into the professional obligation to recognize that continued resistance serves no military purpose and costs lives without changing the outcome. The garrison has been encircled since August 7. It has been under sustained American artillery fire, whose effects on the outer fortifications and the fighting positions have been visible in the damage assessments that the VIII Corps observers have been compiling for 6 weeks. It is suffering under air bombardment from the IX Tactical Air Command's fighter bombers, whose ordnance has been working on the port facilities and the garrison's supply infrastructure since the encirclement was established. Its ammunition is being consumed faster than it can be replaced from supplies that no longer exist in any practically accessible form, because the harbor approaches have been blockaded, and because the Luftwaffe's ability to supply the garrison by air has long since been foreclosed by the Allied air superiority that covers the Brest sector without interruption. The military situation, whose continuation will cost additional lives on both sides. American infantry pushing into the garrison's final positions. German defenders fighting from the rubble of fortifications that the artillery has been reducing over 6 weeks. Has no strategic outcome that differs from the outcome that surrender would produce today. Ramcke knows this. He is not operating from ignorance of the military situation or from a delusion about the siege's probable outcome. He is a professional of the first order, a commander whose career in the German Parachute Corps has placed him at the center of the most demanding operations of the war. Crete, in 1941, where he jumped at the age of 52, when most German generals his age were commanding from headquarters. North Africa in 1942, where he commanded the Ramcke Parachute Brigade through El Alamein and walked out of the desert with a handful of men when the brigade was destroyed. The Eastern Front in 1943, where the Parachute Corps' combat reputation was sustained in the defensive fighting that followed Stalingrad. His professional assessment of the military situation at Brest is the assessment of a man who has been in situations that looked like certain defeat before, and who has specific and personal evidence that situations that look like certain defeat are not always certain defeat. His professional assessment is that the military situation at Brest is untenable in the sense that the garrison will not ultimately win, will not drive the VIII Corps back to Normandy, will not be relieved by a German counteroffensive that does not exist, will not achieve any outcome other than eventual surrender or destruction. His professional assessment is also, simultaneously and without contradiction, that he will not surrender Brest until the military situation has been made so completely untenable that no professional military court convened to assess his conduct could argue that he surrendered prematurely, and that the definition of completely untenable is his to determine and not Middleton's. He puts the refusal on the messenger's table and tells him to take it back. The German officers in Ramcke's command who will later discuss the Brest siege with the American Army's Foreign Military Studies interviewers, are not unanimous in their understanding of why the garrison refused every surrender term, and the lack of unanimity is itself the most revealing thing about the siege's character, because it suggests that even the men who were inside the decision and who observed the refusals at close range cannot fully account for the specific combination of factors that produced them. Some of them offer the explanation of the Führerbefehl, the Hitler order designating Brest as a Festung, a fortress to be defended to the last man and the last round, the order that Ramcke was obeying, and whose violation by a German commander of Ramcke's public prominence would have produced consequences reaching beyond Ramcke himself to his family and his subordinates in the system of collective accountability that the Nazi command structure had been applying since the July 20 assassination attempt had sharpened the apparatus of enforcement. Some of them offer the explanation of the garrison's institutional culture, the specific and documented ethos of the German parachute corps, the Fallschirmjäger, whose identity as an elite formation whose members do not surrender, has been built over 4 years of the most demanding combat the German army has produced, and whose expression, in the specific person of Hermann Ramcke, is more concentrated and more absolute than its expression in any other commander in the German military's order of battle. Ramcke is the Fallschirmjäger's most extreme embodiment. He has been constructing this identity since the First World War and has been confirming it through every subsequent operation. For him, surrender is not an option that the military situation can make available. It is a category of outcome that his identity excludes. Some of them offer neither explanation and simply note that Ramcke refused, that the refusal was consistent with his character in the specific sense that anyone who knew Ramcke would have predicted that he would refuse, and that they were not in a position to tell him he was wrong, because telling Hermann Ramcke he was wrong about a matter of military honor was not a conversation that any subordinate officer who understood the man would have initiated. What none of them offer is an explanation that fully satisfies the questioner, that fully accounts for the specific and costly choice to continue a defense whose outcome everyone on both sides knew from the beginning of September, and that the continuation of the defense would not alter in any way that the German military position could benefit from. That is the mystery of Brest. It is the question that the siege poses in its most concentrated form, the question that the 6 refusals and the 43 days accumulate toward without resolving. Not how did the garrison hold. The military explanation of the holding is straightforward, built from concrete and parachute infantry, and the determined application of whatever resources the encirclement has left inside the perimeter. But why did the garrison continue to hold when holding served no military purpose that surrender the previous week would not have served? And what the why tells us about the specific and human forces that the German military's particular culture of honor and obedience and elite identity had assembled and concentrated and absolutized in the person of the general who refused. The port of Brest in August 1944 is one of the most strategically significant facilities on the Atlantic coast of France, and its significance in August 1944 is not the same as its peacetime significance. In peacetime, Brest is the French Navy's primary Atlantic base, a city of 100,000 people built around the harbor, whose deep water and whose position on the Breton Peninsula's tip made it the natural terminus for the transatlantic shipping lanes whose traffic the port has been handling since the 17th century. In August 1944, Brest is the deepwater port whose operational capacity, approximately 8,000 tons per day throughput before the war's destruction of facilities, capable of augmentation to significantly higher rates for military supply purposes, with the engineering investment that the American Army's port construction units can provide if the facilities are intact when captured, is the specific and documented reason that Eisenhower's operational planning has assigned its capture a priority, whose resource allocation, 3 infantry divisions, a corps headquarters, and the sustained commitment of VIII Corps for the duration of the reduction, reflects the strategic weight of what a functioning Brest would contribute to the Allied supply situation if the port can be taken before the garrison destroys it. The Allied armies driving east from Normandy in August 1944 are sustaining a supply situation whose severity is the primary constraint on the campaign's operational pace. A situation whose documentation in the logistical records of the 12th Army Group shows a force advancing at speeds that the pre-invasion planning had not projected as achievable, and that the supply system has not been scaled to support at those speeds across those distances. The advance has outrun its logistical infrastructure, in the specific sense that the railheads are 400 miles behind the front, the pre-positioned supply depots are 400 miles behind the front, and the trucks of the Red Ball Express are covering the gap at the cost of fuel consumption, whose rate is itself contributing to the supply shortage it is trying to address. The port at Cherbourg is operational, but insufficient for the scale of the Allied advance's supply requirement. The beaches of Normandy are at their capacity, and the additional throughput that Brest could provide, if the port is taken intact or with its facilities only partially damaged, is the specific and measurable difference between a sustained Allied advance through the autumn and the supply halt that the German High Command has been hoping will give it time to reconstitute its western defenses behind the Siegfried Line. Brest is not just a city. It is a logistical calculation expressed in concrete and steel, and the deep water harbor, whose capture intact could sustain the Allied advance for months, and whose capture destroyed could serve no supply purpose at all. The German garrison's mission, in this strategic context, is not primarily military, in the conventional sense of defeating an opposing force in the field. It is logistical denial. If Brest can be kept out of Allied hands until its harbor facilities have been rendered inoperable by systematic German destruction, the denial pays a strategic dividend that outlasts the garrison's surrender, and that the garrison's defense makes possible by buying the time that the destruction requires. The garrison's mission is to deny the port to the Allies, to destroy its facilities before yielding them, and to delay the Allied access to the harbor by the maximum time that the garrison's resources and the defensive positions permit. Ramcke has received this mission from Hitler's Festung Directive and from the German Naval High Command's specific instructions regarding the port facility's denial. He intends to execute it with an absolutely literal faithfulness that his subordinate officers will later describe as beyond what even the directive required, and that the directive's authors, had they specified the minimum required standard, would probably not have described as excessive. General Hermann-Bernhard Ramcke is 55 years old in August 1944, the oldest active commander of a German parachute formation in combat, and the most decorated officer in the Fallschirmjäger's entire history. He wears the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds, the Ritterkreuz mit Eichenlaub, Schwertern und Brillanten, one of only 27 German soldiers across the entire war to receive the highest grade of Germany's highest military decoration, a decoration whose conditions of award require operational performance at a level that the German decoration system has established as the absolute maximum of military achievement. His biography is the biography of a man who has been building his military identity not as a received inheritance or as a social privilege, but as a deliberate and sustained construction project that has been underway since before the First World War, and that has been demonstrated in the Second, under circumstances that would have broken a different character, or a character whose investment in the project was less complete. He is the son of a blacksmith from Schleswig-Holstein, enlisted as a sailor before the First World War, rose through the ranks to commissioned status, through merit in conditions that did not facilitate advancement for men of his background, and translated his career's accumulated experience into the specific and concentrated form of the German parachute commander at his most extreme expression. He jumped into Crete in 1941, at an age when most senior German commanders were directing operations from headquarters. He commanded the Ramcke Parachute Brigade in North Africa through its complete destruction at El Alamein, escaping with a handful of men on foot across the desert. He has been in situations that looked like certain defeat before. He has survived them by the specific combination of physical endurance, tactical skill, and the absolute refusal to accept the situation's definition of his options. He is, in August 1944 at Brest, the worst possible garrison commander from the American perspective, and the best possible one from Hitler's Festung directive's perspective. He will not surrender when the military situation makes surrender reasonable. He will not surrender when the ammunition is running low. He will not surrender when the food is rationed. He will not surrender when 6 formal demands have made the American position entirely clear. He will surrender only when the literal physical exhaustion of the garrison's capacity to continue fighting has been achieved, when the ammunition is gone, when the food is gone, when the positions have been reduced to rubble. The question is not whether he will eventually be defeated. He will. The question is what it will cost to defeat him, and whether the cost is worth the strategic prize that the American VIII Corps is paying to take a port that Ramcke will destroy before he yields it. August 7, 1944. The perimeter of Brest. General Troy Middleton's VIII Corps seals the German garrison inside the Brest perimeter in the encirclement that will run for the next 43 days. Middleton is a deliberate and methodical commander, a Louisiana State University professor of military science before the war, whose intellectual approach to military problems has been one of the consistent qualities that Eisenhower has identified as making him one of the American Army's reliable corps commanders, and whose assignment to the Brest siege reflects the assessment that reducing a major fortified port city requires the kind of careful professional management that Middleton's character provides. He brings 3 infantry divisions to the encirclement. The 2nd Infantry Division under General Walter Robertson, a formation with the specific and earned institutional confidence of a division that has been in combat since the Normandy landing's first hours. The 8th Infantry Division under General Donald Stroh, whose operation against the Brest outer works has been building experience in the specific tactical problems of attacking fortified positions. And the 29th Infantry Division, whose Omaha Beach record has given it a grim professionalism about difficult assault operations. The supporting artillery and engineering that a major siege operation requires are assigned to the Corps with the expectation that the siege will be short. Middleton's resource situation is not ideal for an extended operation. The Third Army's operational priority is the advance east, and the VIII Corps' assignment to the Brest siege has been made on the assumption that a German garrison facing encirclement without resupply will quickly recognize the futility of continued resistance and accept the surrender terms that any professional military commander would recognize as reasonable. Middleton has been told the siege will take a week. He has approximately 90,000 men in the Brest sector against Ramcke's 38,000. The numbers say it should be quick. The garrison he is besieging numbers approximately 38,000, including the Fallschirmjäger of Ramcke's 2nd Parachute Division, the fortress infantry of the Brest garrison, the naval personnel of the German Navy's Atlantic Command, and the diverse collection of service and support troops whose defensive utility varies widely, but whose physical presence in the perimeter adds to the number of bodies that have to be fed and armed and managed for the duration of a siege that Ramcke intends to make as long as possible. By August 20th, 2 weeks into the siege, it is clear the garrison will not surrender on schedule. The American commanders who were told the siege would take a week are now planning for a siege that will take weeks more. The VIII Corps artillery, which has been working on the outer fortifications since August 7th, with the Corps' organic artillery, supplemented by the heavy artillery groups that Middleton has requested from the Third Army, has been producing the specific and documented results of sustained artillery against prepared defensive positions. Visible damage to the exposed surfaces of the fort positions whose concrete and masonry the reconnaissance photography can document, suppression of the defenders in their fighting positions during fire missions that prevents the German defenders from using those positions as the assault approaches, and the cumulative degradation of the garrison's communications and supply infrastructure that sustained fire always produces over weeks of systematic targeting. It has not produced the surrender that was supposed to follow from the overwhelming American superiority in firepower and in men. The superiority in firepower is real. The superiority in men is real. The garrison commander's refusal to acknowledge either as dispositive is also real, and it is more powerful than either. Ramcke is fighting not against firepower, but against the American calculation that firepower eventually produces surrender. He is testing whether that calculation holds against a commander who has decided it does not. September 8, 1944. The inner defensive perimeter of Brest. The VIII Corps' 3 divisions have been tightening the ring for 32 days in the sustained and costly progress of a siege against a garrison commander who has been using every defensive resource available to him to make each day's progress as expensive as possible for the attackers. The VIII Corps has been bringing its artillery to bear on the outer fortifications since August 7th, firing with the systematic precision of a Corps artillery staff that has been targeting the fortification system's specific vulnerabilities, the exposed observation posts, the communications trenches, the vehicle parks and supply points, and has been producing the cumulative degradation that sustained fire always produces in a fixed defensive system. The VIII Corps has been using its infantry to press the outer positions with the specific and costly work of attacking a garrison commander who has positioned his best units, the 2nd Parachute Division's regiments, in the fighting positions whose reduction requires the infantry's physical presence in the kill zones that the German defensive design has created around every position. The perimeter has been compressed to the point where the inner city and the harbor installations are the garrison's only remaining territory. The 2nd Infantry Division, under General Walter Robertson, has been fighting through the Crozon Peninsula south of Brest, with the 8th Infantry Division, under General Donald Stroh, pressing from the north. Their combined pressure, reducing the perimeter in the specific and costly way that combat in fortified urban terrain always extracts its cost, house by house, block by block, position by position, with each German defensive position requiring the specific application of infantry, artillery, and engineering resources that the position's construction has been designed to maximize. The near failure in the American siege, the moment when the pace of the reduction most clearly fails to match the cost being paid, arrives in the 2nd week of September, when the VIII Corps' artillery, which has been firing at rates whose ammunition consumption has been drawing on the Third Army's supply reserves, at volumes that Patton's eastward drive cannot easily spare, begins experiencing the supply constraints that the overall Allied logistical situation in September 1944 is imposing on every American formation that is not on the primary axis of advance toward the Rhine. Artillery shells that should be arriving at the Brest fire mission batteries are being retained in the Third Army's supply system for the advance toward the Siegfried Line. The heavy artillery groups whose fire has been the primary instrument of the siege's progress are being reduced in their daily fire allocation. The fire support whose sustained and systematic application has been the primary tool of the reduction's progress is becoming intermittent at the exact moment when the garrison's perimeter has been compressed to the inner defensive works, the fortified urban terrain of the city's center and the harbor installations, where the fighting is at its most intense and where the infantry's need for close fire support is most acute. The VIII Corps is being asked to complete a siege with diminishing artillery resources against a garrison commander who has no intention of making the completion easier and who would, if he knew about the supply constraints on the other side of the wire, take them as confirmation that continued resistance was producing exactly the strategic friction he intended. It is in this context, reduced artillery, compressed perimeter, sustained German resistance, that Middleton sends the September 15 demand that Ramcke refuses with the specific and documented brevity of a man who has been making this decision for 6 weeks and finds it no harder to make on the 6th iteration than on the 1st. September 18, 1944. Brest falls. Not because Ramcke changes his mind about the principle of surrender. The principle has been established since August 7th and has not changed. Not because a new surrender term has been constructed that offers something the previous 6 did not. Not because Middleton has found the argument that Ramcke has been waiting to hear. Brest falls because the garrison has been reduced to the specific and literally untenable position that Ramcke has defined. through his 6 refusals and his 6 weeks of resistance, as the threshold for capitulation. The ammunition is exhausted in the specific and documented sense that the fighting positions have been consuming the last of the reserve allocations that have been rationed since late August. The food is exhausted in the specific sense that the garrison's ration has been reduced to the level that the medical staff has identified as below the minimum for continued operational function. The water supply from the city's infrastructure has been damaged to the point where the garrison's hydration is being managed at emergency-level allocations. The fighting positions that the outer defensive ring has provided have been reduced to rubble by the sustained American fire that has been increasing again since the supply interruption of mid-September was resolved. And the men who have been holding those positions, the Fallschirmjäger of the 2nd Parachute Division, and the fortress infantry, and the naval personnel, and the service troops, have been fighting continuously for 6 weeks at the cost of approximately 10,000 killed and wounded. Ramcke surrenders. He does not surrender to the American soldier who finds him in the command post where the garrison's last operational direction has been centered. He insists on surrendering to a general officer, in the specific and documented assertion of the professional military protocol that even the moment of capitulation is governed by rank and procedure. When Brigadier General Charles Canham of the 8th Infantry Division presents himself as the American officer authorized to accept the German commander's surrender, Ramcke demands to see Canham's credentials, demands to see the written documentation that confirms Canham's rank and his authority to accept the formal surrender of a German garrison and its commander. The demand is made by a general who has been fighting the American VIII Corps for 6 weeks, and who knows perfectly well that Canham's uniform identifies his rank and that his presence here identifies his authority. The demand is not about information. It is about the final performance of the protocol, whose maintenance Ramcke considers the last obligation that his professional honor requires him to fulfill. Canham produces the credentials. The surrender is accepted. The 43-day siege is over. It is theater. It is also, in its specific and concentrated expression, the summary of everything that the Brest siege has been about from the moment the first surrender demand arrived, on August 9th, and Ramcke sent back his first refusal. A garrison commander who has decided that his honor, the Fallschirmjäger's honor, the Parachute Corps' honor, his own honor built from Crete and El Alamein and the Eastern Front and 40 years of German military service, requires the performance of resistance to its absolute limit, that the performance includes the manner of the surrender as well as the timing of it, and that no American general will be able to say that Hermann Ramcke surrendered easily or without cost, or without making the American VIII Corps pay every price that the situation permitted him to exact. The legacy of the siege of Brest and of the German garrison's refusal of every surrender term is a legacy that must be assessed on 2 scales simultaneously, and whose assessment on those 2 scales produces opposite verdicts, whose coexistence is the most accurate measure of what happened at Brest. On the military scale, the Brest siege is an Allied success in the specific and measurable terms that military operations are assessed. The VIII Corps has taken the port, has captured 38,000 German soldiers, including their commanding general, and has removed the Brest garrison from the German order of battle at a time when every German formation the Western Front can retain has operational value. The capture of Ramcke himself, one of Germany's most decorated and most prominent military figures, whose surrender is photographed and reported, is a public military event whose significance extends beyond the tactical to the symbolic. These are real and measurable military outcomes whose value to the Allied order of battle is genuine. On the strategic scale, the Brest siege is an Allied failure in the specific and measurable terms that strategic operations are assessed. Ramcke has destroyed the port's facilities so thoroughly before his surrender, blown the cranes, demolished the dry docks, sunk block ships in the harbor approaches, destroyed the fuel storage and the warehouse infrastructure, that the port's operational capacity is not achieved during the war. The port is not operational for Allied supply purposes until April 1945, 7 months after Ramcke's surrender, by which time the campaign that the port was supposed to sustain has been resolved by other means, and the logistical crisis of autumn 1944, whose relief Brest was supposed to provide, has been managed through the improvised solutions that the Allied supply system developed when Brest was not available. The strategic dividend of the garrison's resistance, the destruction of the port's functionality for the duration of the war, has been paid in full by a garrison commander whose professional mission was not to hold the port, but to deny it. Eisenhower's post-war assessment, published in his memoir and elaborated in the operational analyses that the American Army's historical section conducted in the years following the war, acknowledges this with the specific and honest candor that Eisenhower's professional character brings to assessments of his own command decisions. The port of Brest was not worth the cost of the siege, in terms of the resources that the VIII Corps consumed over 43 days, and the operational opportunities that the Corps' assignment to Brest foreclosed at a time when those resources might have been applied to the advance east that was the campaign's primary strategic purpose. The 6,000 American casualties at Brest, killed and wounded across the 43-day siege in the specific and individual terms of men who died in the fighting at Doulas and Crozon, and the outer fortifications and the inner city, men whose names are in the 2nd Infantry Divisions and the 8th Infantry Divisions, and the 29th Infantry Division's casualty records for August and September 1944, are the cost of the decision to take a port whose garrison destroyed it before yielding it. The cost extends beyond the American casualties to the operational opportunity cost of 3 infantry divisions and their supporting elements spending 43 days on a siege rather than on the advance east that was consuming the autumn's operational window. The German officers in Ramcke's command, who could not explain why the garrison refused every surrender term, were describing, without fully articulating it, something true about the siege's fundamental character. The garrison did not refuse because surrender was militarily impossible. It refused because its commander had defined the garrison's purpose, not as the military defense of the port, but as the denial of the port and the demonstration of the Fallschirmjäger's honor, and those two purposes could both be served by a long refusal, whose end was surrender and a destroyed harbor. What the American VIII Corps could never offer as a surrender term was an offer that gave Ramcke the thing he was actually fighting for, the thing that the 6 formal refusals and the 43 days were accumulating in the specific and irreversible way that military reputation is built through the demonstration of what a command will endure. He was not fighting to hold the port for German military use. He knew the port would fall. He was fighting to prove that the 2nd Parachute Division and the Brest garrison could make the Americans take the port the hard way, could force the expenditure of 6,000 American casualties and 43 days of a Corps' operational commitment and the resources of 3 infantry divisions on the specific and documented proposition that the garrison would not make it easy. He proved it. The harbor's destroyed facilities proved it in the specific and strategic language of a logistical denial that outlasted the garrison by 7 months. And the Americans who walked through Brest's ruins in September 1944 understood, in the specific and chilling way that victors understand the nature of what they have just been made to pay for, that the garrison commander whose refusals they had been reading for 6 weeks had been telling them the truth about what the siege would cost from the moment the first demand arrived and the first refusal went back. The truth is this: you can take a port from Hermann Ramcke, but you cannot take it on any terms except his.